All right, this is part 2 of chapter 13, part 2 of 2. We're going to go into now chemical control of microbes. We did talk about in part 1 physical control. So now we're going to look at these different chemicals that we use to, disinfect the world around us. And I've already made this like little table for you. We're going to talk about phenols and triclosan and their mode of action and then examples. So that's already pretty much, this is like your snapshot study guide, which you can move through later. And then this one I wanted you to just fill out yourself, right? So when you look at the different chemical agents, what are some advantages and disadvantages of them, right? So read the book. I did have some slides with the advantages and disadvantages, but you definitely want to take a look at the book as well. All right, factors affecting chemical methods of control. We also have this, right? So what is the material being treated, right? What is the degree of contamination? The time of exposure that we can use the disinfectant on, what's the strength of the chemical, what are, are there any organic materials? So pretty similar to the other factors in physical control. So let's start with phenols. This is really fun because Listerine, right? We all know Listerine as a mouthwash, was named after Joseph Lister, right? So Joseph Lister was the guy that came up with the first antiseptic, which they used something called carbolic acid. Carbolic acid was pretty strong, but they used it on surgery, people in surgery, on surgical equipment and also on their tissue. And it saved, improved the survival of surgery by a very significant degree. And so carbolic acid is no longer used today because it's very irritating to the body. So instead of carbolic acid, they have phenolics or phenolics. These are derivatives of carbolic acid or derivatives of phenol that are less toxic. So they look the same. If you take a look at the chemical nature of what a phenol is, this is a phenol. It is a benzene ring. This is called a benzene ring with an alcohol group. And if you look, like, there's one, here's one. They're just different because they have different components to them, but that core part is there. That's why they're in this category. And interestingly, phenolics are naturally produced organic molecules. Thyme oil has a phenolic, is a phenolic. Eucalyptus oil is also one. So they are natural, sort of like antiseptics or antimicrobial oils that you can use, and a lot of people use them for that. How these work is they disrupt membranes, denature proteins, and then derivatives of this can be found in like Lysol. The downside of these is that you can't use them on infants. They actually cause brain damage to infants. They can be irritating and they can have lots of side effects. One particular one you should know of is called triclosan. So triclosan is a antibiotic-ish substance. So it's antibacterial. This triclosan is very common in your antibacterial soaps. However, antibacterial soaps have been shown over and over and over again that they have no better action than regular soap. They're not any better at killing microbes than just regular soap. And on top of that, triclosan is actually dangerous for your own tissues. There's some risk risk in having some issues with triclosan on your body. And thirdly, you can cause triclosan resistant bacteria to form. So let's look at what's written here. They actually banned, right? The FDA banned the marketing of this over-the-counter antiseptic. So triclosan was banned and also 18 other chemicals. They don't have evidence for the efficacy, right? It's no better than regular soap. And they actually cause long-term health risks to some people. And this is the actual really scary thing, is that you can actually form triclosan-resistant bacterial strains, okay? What that means is when a bacterium becomes resistant to something, right? So in this case, it's triclosan. That means that they can be exposed to triclosan and basically not get killed. It does not bother them at all because there's some resistance that they gained through evolution that protects them from triclosan. So because triclosan was used in so widely, I remember it was 10 years ago or something that everything was antibiotic soap, right? There's antibiotic soap everywhere and antibiotic hand sanitizer. But that molecule gets into the environment, and then you're going to disrupt sort of natural populations of bacteria. A lot of these natural populations of bacteria help to stabilize, the algae community, because if the bacteria go away, then the algae overgrow. And they also can act as endocrine disruptors in fish and amphibians, so it can really mess with their reproductive cycle. So it's just a bad, nasty chemical to have in the environment, and so that's why the FDA banned them. All right, heavy metals are used a lot as a natural antimicrobial. Heavy metals, what they do is they bind to the proteins, and so proteins, enzymes for number one, they're going to stop the enzymes from working. They can denature proteins, and when you denature proteins, you're going to stop the cell from working correctly, right? Because a lot of those proteins are enzymes. And so they give them very strong antimicrobial properties. Now, the ones that are most popular are bolded for you. Copper is used a lot in sort of handles, in pots and pans, in water containers. So copper is a really good algicide, actually. Let me just put algae here. And this is the reason why you need copper water pipes that come into your house, because they don't want any pipes that might grow, microbes and algae as municipal water is coming into your house. Going out, that's a different issue. You don't need copper going out, but you need copper coming in. Let me also say that copper is mentioned down here, right? I talked about the water pipes, water storage. Silver is also very naturally antimicrobial. All right. This silver is used in burn dressings when someone that exposed tissue might be too delicate for like alcohol or any sort of chemical antiseptic. Silver will naturally kill those bacterial cells. In this picture here in letter E, it shows you the downside of too much heavy metal. So this guy here is suffering from argyria, and that is too much silver in the body. It's irreversible. Okay, so somehow this man has gotten like way too much silver in his body, and as you can see, turned his skin this color. Let's see, letter D, antiseptic mouthwashes will commonly contain zinc, and zinc does the same thing. So what we have here is copper, silver, zinc as the big ones here. Copper, silver, and zinc, yeah. All right, now our next one is our halogens, iodine, chlorine, and fluorine. So these are three different halogens: iodine, chlorine, fluorine. All right, so what is iodine, right? So they all have a basic compound, and they're going to bind with organic molecules and then kill the microbes that way. In this first sentence, an iodophore is a compound mixed with an organic molecule. So iodine itself is actually a little bit unstable, but you can add a different molecule there to stabilize it. And this is where betadine is basically. You can see in this picture that they use iodine before surgery because iodine is actually a sterilant. It's a really good agent to use on skin. And so they use it before surgery. Chlorine, right? We know chlorine because we have chlorinated water. We also chlorinate swimming pools, right? So that's a way of treating and keeping microbes down. When you add chlorine gas, because it's a gas, it turns into something called hypochlorous acid, and that is the active compound. So it's hypochlorous acid. And again, this is how we this is how we treat our drinking water. This is how we treat wastewater. This is in bleach. It's the active ingredient in bleach. This is our chlorine in our pools. There's another form of chlorine. So hypochlorous acid is one, and then there's a chloramine, which is something that lasts longer in drinking water. So there's two forms of this. And then the last one, fluorine, is something that you may have heard of in toothpaste, and also they put fluorine or fluoride in the municipal drinking water. What fluoride does for dental health is it helps to, it basically goes into the enamel of your teeth. It draws in more minerals. It makes your enamel harder. And when your enamel is harder, you get less cavities, fewer cavities. How that happens, and we'll talk about cavities later, but the microbes in your mouth, when they have a chance to ferment the sugars, right? So the glucose and the sucrose and candy, right? This is why candy is so bad for cavities, is that the bacteria in your mouth ferment the sugar. When they ferment the sugar, they make acids. The acids will erode your enamel, and then underneath your enamel there's soft tissue, and so the bacteria will start to grow into that soft tissue, and then that can get into the root of your tooth, and basically that's how a cavity starts, is by eroding the enamel. So by putting fluoride in the water, you're going to help everybody harden the enamel to prevent cavities. All right, alcohol's next. So this is a really common form of antiseptic, and it can also be a disinfectant. There's two forms of alcohol here. There's ethyl alcohol, which is the kind of alcohol that's also found in alcoholic drinks. It's called ethanol. And then isopropyl alcohol is the kind that you find in rubbing alcohol. This is toxic. If you drink this, you will die. So don't do that. What does alcohol do? Alcohol denatures proteins and disrupts membranes. So and I remember this during COVID, you had, everybody wanted, all the alcohol was gone. 70% alcohol actually works better than 100% alcohol. And I remember during COVID, people would just get like 100% alcohol, but it actually doesn't work as well as 70%. Why? Because alcohols coagulate proteins, and that means that there has to be some water present for that coagulation to happen. Also, in higher alcohol concentrations, there's going to be rapid coagulation of surface proteins. So, for example, let's say you have a bacteria with a capsule or a slime layer, right? That alcohol will coagulate the outside proteins and then leave the inside alone. So it prevents effective penetration of the cells and therefore not as good killing. Okay, so when you are looking for a disinfectant or antiseptic, you always want to go for 70%. Alcohols are great. They're bactericidal, fungicidal, virucidal, but for enveloped viruses only. Why? Because the enveloped viruses are more susceptible, because that outer membranes are really easy to destroy, but proteins are not. So disrupting the envelope can kill them, quote unquote, or basically deactivate or inactivate those viruses, because the spikes that were on that envelope are gone. And so the entry mechanism into your cells are gone. Alcohols are not sporicidal. They also are very volatile. They dry quickly. They can dehydrate your skin, and they don't work well if you have organic dirt or anything on your hands. They need to be sort of on a clean hand. Soaps and detergents. So a surfactant is a surface acting agent, which is what surfactant is, a conglomeration of those three words: surface acting agent. And soaps and detergents have this very similar shape to them, or this molecular structure to them, very similar to a phospholipid. So they're going to have a charged region, a hydrophilic region, and then they're going to also have this really long hydrophobic region, hydrophobic tail. So just like our phospholipid. How they work is, well, how they're made, right? They're the salts of fatty acids. So this guy here, this hydrophobic tail, that came from a fat. That's why we have soaps that are derived from animal fat. There's olive oil soaps. You can make soaps out of anything as long as it's a fat to begin with, like butter, because it'll produce this long hydrophobic tail, and you can sort of chemically manipulate to make a head there. But how they work is basically so in this picture here, this is a soap molecule. So this is the hydrophilic head, right? This is the hydrophobic tail. So when you have grease on the surface of something. So let's just call this like your lasagna dish. This is the oil that's left over and you want to wash it. So what happens is the soap molecule will insert the tail into the grease because this is hydrophobic and this is hydrophobic. So they both want to be together, right? So we can call this like lipophilic, which is, this is the word they use here, hydrophilic. Oh, no, lipophilic. Sorry, you guys, forget what I just said there. But this long hydrophobic tail interacts with the hydrophobic nature of the grease. All right. And then what happens is the water comes along when you rinse. The water, as pictured here, little water molecules, the water will pull and interact with these hydrophilic heads, right? The hydrophilic heads will interact with the water and naturally form this like barrier. So the grease will be in the middle along with the fatty acid tails, and then the hydrophilic parts will lift up and away with the water. So when you rinse the soap has basically latched onto the dirt, pulled the dirt off the surface, wrapped with the soap, and then goes with the water when you rinse it. So you can think of this as not really a chemical agent, is it? It's more of a physical, like I'm going to physically pick up the grease and remove it, right? Hand washing with soap is really important as a part of just being a healthcare worker and people who are working with people that might be sick, even at home. If you have kids that are sick, you want to make sure you wash your hands a lot. So there is, we kind of all know now the happy birthday song, right? You want to wash your hands as long as you have that song going from COVID. But yeah, you want to scrub and you want to make sure that your soap has reached every nook and corner of your hand so that you can mechanically remove the grease. And why are soaps not considered disinfectants? So it's not a disinfectant because it does not kill cells. It doesn't kill microbes. It just lifts them away. So the soaps are more like a mechanical process of removing the microbes. They don't necessarily kill. They might like disrupt membranes on some microbes, but it's not necessarily like a killing agent. So it's not considered a disinfectant. Now, there is a special kind of surfactant called a quat, and you can see that the quat is really similar to what we just talked about. It has a long fatty acid tail. It has a hydrophilic head region. Here's another form of a quat, same thing, hydrophilic head and hydrophobic tail. The words, right, these are the names of the quats. You don't need to memorize them, just know the term quat. And they're a little bit different just because of the nitrogen. So instead of like sodium, they have a nitrogen part to their head, and that's why they're in this category. But they do the same thing. They can disrupt plasma membrane. So they insert themselves within the plasma membrane, and then they can disrupt the plasma membrane. And you guys know that if you disrupt a plasma membrane, that membrane is the selectively permeable barrier. It is going to keep things in and out of the cell. So when you break that, now you're going to have all kinds of nutrient leakage. You're going to have all the molecules that should be inside the cell leaking out. So it can definitely kill the cell when you disrupt the plasma membrane. All right, our next category is going to be alkylating agents. One of the most famous ones is formaldehyde. If you haven't heard of it, this is what they put all the preserved biological specimens in. In the past, they used to, for medical schools, right, when you have a cadaver, they would put the cadaver in formaldehyde to preserve the body because it's a really good antiseptic, disinfectant. It is sterilizes, it is really, really effective. However, it's very rarely used in any high concentration anymore because it is a carcinogen, but it's such a good sterilant that they'll use it sometimes in very small percentages. What an alkylating agent does is it disinfects by basically, some chemical magic. It replaces a hydrogen atom in a molecule with an alkyl group, which looks something like this, and basically just inactivates enzymes and nucleic acids, right? So it hits enzymes in DNA and RNA. And so there's formaldehyde. Sometimes you'll hear it called formalin when it's at 37% concentrated. It's also can be a gas. and a biocide, so it kills living things. Very broad spectrum, bacteria, viruses, fungi, endospores. So since we have the word endospore, it can sterilize. And what's nice about it is you don't need heat. You can also, it's at low temperatures. Yeah, and it's a chemical fixative, right? So we look at these frogs have been fixed. And they're not only sterile, but what happens is the tissue hardens with formaldehyde. That chemical way of saying that is cross-linking proteins. So the proteins will cross-link with each other, basically form like a really strong bond. And so if you ever pick up a specimen that has been embalmed with formalin, it will feel completely different than living tissue. It's just like a lot harder. It's changed color. It's just a different thing, but it's used because it has such powerful sterilization properties and fixative properties, which means that the tissue can remain in a jar forever and not break down and not like lose its form. One alkylating agent that's used as a gas a lot is ethylene oxide. And the reason why this is mentioned is because it can penetrate through materials, which is very useful in this very particular scenario, and maybe more to come, right? So in 2001, there was a rash of anthrax spores being sent through the mail to Congress, to the White House. And one time it got through, and then, everybody had to evacuate the White House, and they had to come in and they had to make sure every single anthrax spore was removed, right? And you're talking about offices, drawers, files, everything in there had to be sterilized. So they used that gas. It can penetrate through plastic. It can penetrate through, I was going to say plastic bags, things like that, but it's highly penetrating. So it's really good. It doesn't only act on the surface. It acts also within, it can permeate through materials. It's also something that you can use cold, so you don't have to heat up the room where there might be heat sensitive items. So this is a really powerful way to fumigate, right, using gas, but also in this sterilizing way, so it can kill spores. All right, coming into the last few. Peroxygens, we're going to talk about hydrogen peroxide, and these guys make free radicals because it's H2O2. So H2O2, I want you to remember that formula in H2O2 has 2 oxygens on it. When you add hydrogen peroxide to a tissue, it will start to form these free radicals that destroy other molecules. They're just basically like unleashing a bunch of bull in a china shop or something. They're just going to run around and cause a lot of havoc. So free radicals are going to destroy the molecules within the cell. Broad spectrum, so they worked on gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, fungi, viruses, and endospores. So look at that, it's sterilant. It can be used as an antiseptic. It's not, we don't want to use it on like really big wounds, but on small wounds it's fine because it can damage the skin or delay healing. So it's, we can use that you can put, inanimate objects in hydrogen peroxide as well as your skin. One interesting thing about hydrogen peroxide is that it does break down naturally into water and oxygen. So this guy here, if you let it sit with the cap off, if you put it into a jar that is clear, the UV light will actually destroy it as well. So it does break down pretty quickly. So that's why it always comes in this brown bottle to keep the light out. Catalase is an enzyme, and you guys have learned this one. Catalase enzymatically converts the hydrogen peroxide into water and oxygen. So microbes that have catalase in them already are going to be a little bit more tolerant to hydrogen peroxide. So they're like already equipped with catalase enzyme, and we can already break down the hydrogen peroxide. Because why? Like, why do these organisms have catalase enzyme in the first place? It's because they're aerobes, right? AER. If you're an aerobic cell, you are constantly requiring oxygen to make ATP. when oxygen comes into the cells, it naturally creates free radicals. Free radicals are a part of daily life. You can't get away from it. You use oxygen, you form free radicals. So one way to protect the cell from an accumulation of free radicals is these enzymes, peroxidase, catalase, that are evolved within these cells to break down any free radicals that may occur. So that's one thing. And actually, right, this oxygen, remember, is given off as a gas. And this is the bubbling we see. So when you put your contact lenses or when you put hydrogen peroxide on a wound and you see it bubble, that tells you that your own cells make catalase. So your own cells might cause some of those bubbles along with maybe some bacteria, but that bubbling is, we are aerobes, we have catalase, and it could be due to our own catalase. Lastly, the food additives. So we'll talk quickly about this. We put different chemicals in food for two things: to inhibit microbial growth and also to minimize spoilage. Spoilage meaning that the food goes bad, changes flavor, starts to get soft, or whatever, the texture changes. So we want to stop that. There's a lot of different chemical preservatives out there. I listed some here, and a lot of them are anti-mold. However, I want to talk about two in particular, which is sulfur dioxide and nitrates. Sulfur dioxide is called sulfites. You'll see this in a lot of dried fruits. If you look at any dried fruit package, it's going to have sulfites. You also have people saying that, oh, I can't drink red wine because it has a lot of sulfates, blah, blah, blah. But it is also used to preserve wine. And sometimes sulfates can cause an allergic reaction, or sulfites can cause allergies, including asthmatic reactions. So that's the downside, but the upside is it can be metabolized by the body. So it's something that we can break down. Nitrates are added to meats predominantly to maintain color and stop the germination of Clostridium botulinum. Remember this guy? This one caused botulism. And so this guy here, Oscar Mayer, so this is some kind of like bologna or preserved meat. Look at here, sodium nitrate, right? You want to avoid foods that have that additive because when you cook them, the nitrates become nitrosamines. These are carcinogenic, they cause cancer. So we really want to make sure when you buy hot dogs or any kind of sausage or meat that you want to cook, that you're getting something that's nitrate free. So you want to avoid those carcinogens. And that's the end of this chapter.